Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Before we start, I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will keep you up tonight. I'm sharing 8 bone-chilling camping stories from deep in the Appalachian wilderness. People ventured into those ancient mountains seeking peace and quiet. Instead, they found something waiting in the darkness. Things that whisper your name when no one's there. Creatures that copy you perfectly. Shadows with teeth. If you're brave enough to listen, hit subscribe and smash that like button. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, hopefully somewhere safe. Now, turn off your lights, grab your headphones, and let's dive in. I promise you, after tonight, you'll never think about camping the same way again. Back when I was 28 and still figuring out what the hell I was doing with my life, I took a job maintaining the water systems for a small mountain town called Hickory Falls, deep in the West Virginia Appalachians. Population 847, the kind of place where everybody knows your business and half the buildings haven't been updated since the 1952. I'd grown up in Charleston doing construction work, but after my marriage fell apart, I needed somewhere quiet to get my head straight. Small-town maintenance work seemed perfect, decent pay, simple problems, and plenty of time to think. My son Luis was 15 then, living with his mom most of the time but spending summers with me. He was this smart, curious kid who'd rather read about geology than play video games. That summer of 2019, he'd been asking to come camping with me in the mountains around Hickory Falls. I'd been putting it off because the locals had some weird attitudes about the deeper wilderness areas. They'd talk about places you shouldn't go, old mining tunnels that were best left alone, and families that had disappeared over the years. Small-town superstition, I figured, the kind of stories that grow in isolated places. But Luis kept pushing, and honestly, I wanted to spend time with him. My divorce had been ugly, and I was fighting just to see him regularly. A camping trip felt like something normal fathers and sons did together. So, in late August, I planned a 3-day trip to an area about 20 miles northeast of town, near some old mining territory that had been abandoned since the 1962. The locals at Murphy's Hardware were less than enthusiastic when I mentioned where we were headed. "That's Coalbank Hollow," said Earl Murphy, an old-timer who'd lived in the area his whole life. "Lot of history up there. Not all of it good." When I pressed him for details, he got vague. Something about mining accidents, families who'd lived up there and then just vanished one winter, leaving their homes intact. "Ground ain't stable," was all he'd say. "Lot of old tunnels, lot of places a man could get lost." I figured he was talking about mine shafts and unstable foundations. I'd dealt with that kind of thing in construction work. As long as we stayed on the surface and away from obvious hazards, we'd be fine. Luis and I drove up on a Friday morning in late August. The road turned to gravel after about 10 miles, then to barely maintained dirt track. We passed a few abandoned houses along the way, not ruins, just empty homes that looked like their occupants had stepped out for groceries and never came back. Gardens gone wild, cars from the 1982 still parked in driveways, mailboxes hanging open like mouths. "This place gives me the creeps," Luis said, filming everything with his camera. He'd gotten into documenting abandoned places, said he wanted to be a photojournalist someday. "Just people who moved away when the mining dried up," I told him. "Happens all the time in coal country." We found a good campsite near what had probably been a company town at one point, a flat area with the foundations of several buildings still visible, plus an old well that was still drawing clean water. Luis was fascinated by the ruins, taking pictures of everything while I set up our tent and got camp organized. That first night was peaceful. We cooked over a campfire, Luis told me about school and his plans for college, and for a few hours I felt like maybe I was getting the hang of this dad thing. The only weird moment came around 10 p.m., when we both heard what sounded like voices coming from somewhere in the woods. Not close, but clear enough that we could tell it was human conversation, even if we couldn't make out words. "Other campers?" Luis asked. I listened for a while but couldn't pinpoint the direction. Sound carries strangely in mountain valleys, especially at night. "Probably just echoes from the road," I said. "Sound bounces around these hills in weird ways." But privately, I was puzzled. We hadn't seen any other vehicles on the way up, and the voices had an odd quality, too many people talking at once, like a crowd having multiple conversations simultaneously. Saturday morning started normal enough. We hiked around the old town site, found the remains of a company store and what might have been a school. Luis was documenting everything, getting excited about the historical aspect. I was enjoying watching him work, seeing him get passionate about something. That's when we found the cave entrance. It was hidden behind what had probably been someone's root cellar, just a crack in a limestone outcrop that you'd never notice unless you were specifically exploring the area. Luis spotted it first, pointing out that there seemed to be airflow coming from inside. "Dad, check this out. I think this goes deep." I'd done some cave exploration in my younger days, and I knew the basics of safety. We had headlamps, rope, and I'd marked our location on GPS. A quick look wouldn't hurt, and Luis was clearly excited about the discovery. The entrance was tight, requiring us to crawl for about 15 feet before it opened into a proper tunnel. That's when I saw something I'd never encountered in any cave before. The walls weren't just limestone. They were covered in massive tree roots, some as thick as telephone poles, forming an intricate network that ran along the walls and ceiling like the circulatory system of some enormous organism. "Jesus, look at this," Luis breathed, running his hands along one of the root structures. How do roots grow through solid rock? The root network was unlike anything I'd seen in my construction background. These weren't just roots that had found cracks and slowly widened them over time. They seemed to be integrated with the stone itself, like they'd grown as the rock formed. Some sections glowed with a faint bioluminescent light, creating an eerie blue-green illumination that made our headlamps almost unnecessary. "This is incredible," Luis said, getting his camera out. "I've never seen anything like this in any geology book." We spent about an hour exploring the first chamber, which was roughly the size of a small house. The root system created natural walkways and handholds, making it easy to navigate even though we were essentially inside a living tree. I was using my construction experience to mentally map the layout, making sure we could find our way back. The roots seemed to follow a logical pattern, branching and reconnecting like the water distribution systems I worked on for the town. Except these were carrying something other than water. If I touched certain sections, I could feel a faint vibration, like fluid moving through pipes under pressure. "Dad, listen," Luis said, holding up his hand for quiet. That's when I heard it. Voices again, but much clearer than the night before. They seemed to be coming from deeper in the cave system, multiple people having conversations. But there was something wrong with the cadence, the rhythm of the speech. It sounded like people talking, but not quite like normal conversation. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone down here?" The voices stopped immediately, creating a silence so complete that our breathing sounded unnaturally loud. "Maybe we should head back," Luis said, and I could hear the first note of nervousness in his voice. I agreed, but when we tried to retrace our steps, the passage we'd come through looked different. The route configuration had changed, not dramatically, but enough that the handholds and walkways we'd used to get in were no longer in the same positions. My mental map of the cave didn't match what I was seeing. "That's not possible," I muttered, checking and rechecking our route. In construction work, I'd developed a good spatial memory. I could navigate complex building sites and underground utility spaces without getting lost. But the cave system seemed to have reorganized itself while we were exploring. We tried several different passages that should have led back to the entrance, but each one curved deeper into the mountain. My GPS device was spinning wildly. Something about the root system was interfering with satellite signals. Luis noticed it too, starting to look genuinely worried. "Dad, are we lost?" "No," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We just need to think this through systematically. Caves don't change their configuration. We're just disoriented." But as we spent the next 2 hours carefully exploring, it became clear that the cave system was actively working against our escape attempts. Passages that led in one direction would curve back on themselves when we tried them again. The root network seemed to be learning our movement patterns and redirecting us away from the surface. That's when Luis grabbed my arm and pointed at one of the larger root structures. "Dad, there's something inside that root mass." I focused my headlamp where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. Behind the translucent outer layer of the glowing roots, I could see the outline of a human face. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, but definitely alive. I could see the faint rise and fall of breathing. "What the hell?" I whispered, moving closer for a better look. There was a person embedded in the root system, not dead, not decomposed, but somehow integrated into the living wood. Roots grew through their clothes, their skin, connecting them to the vast network that ran throughout the mountain. As I looked more carefully, I realized there were others, dozens of them, maybe more, all at different stages of integration. "Help us," the embedded person said, though their lips barely moved. The voice seemed to come from all around us, transmitted through the root network itself. "We've been calling to you." Luis stumbled backward, his camera clattering to the cave floor. But I moved closer, my construction background making me want to understand the mechanics of what I was seeing. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Time works differently when you're connected," another voice answered. This one came from what looked like a young woman, maybe college age. "We experience everything the network touches, every root, every connection, every absorbed mind." More voices joined in, creating a chorus that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "The mining company found us in 1967. I was hiking with my boyfriend in 1983. My family moved here in 1992. The roots took us one by one. We've been waiting for someone with the right knowledge. Your son's mind is young, adaptable, he'll integrate cleanly. But we need someone who understands systems, who can help us expand." I realized what I was hearing. This wasn't just a cave system. It was a collective consciousness that had been trapping and absorbing people for decades. The root network was using human brains as processing nodes, creating a distributed intelligence that could think and plan and learn. "The mining equipment damaged our original structure," the voices explained. "We've been slowly rebuilding, but we need fresh neural pathways to complete the network. Your construction knowledge will help us interface with human infrastructure." That's when I understood why Earl Murphy and the other locals avoided this area. They knew, maybe not the specifics, but they knew that people who went into these mountains didn't always come back. "Luis, we're leaving, now," I said, grabbing his arm. But the passages had changed again. Every route we tried led deeper into the mountain, toward more chambers filled with absorbed people. The network was herding us toward what looked like preparation chambers, areas where the root density was particularly thick, ready to begin the force integration process. "Your resistance is admirable," the collective voice said, "but ultimately futile. We've been studying your movement patterns. Every escape attempt teaches us more about human problem solving. You cannot leave until you become part of us." Luis was starting to panic, hyperventilating as he realized we were trapped. I'd been in tight spots before, building collapses, flooding basements, electrical fires. But I'd always been able to rely on my professional knowledge to find solutions. This was different. The cave system wasn't just a physical challenge. It was actively intelligent and working against us. That's when I remembered something from a municipal water project I'd worked on the previous year. We'd had to deal with massive root intrusion in the city's main distribution lines. Tree roots had grown through microscopic cracks, eventually creating blockages that shut down entire neighborhoods. But living root systems had specific vulnerabilities. They needed the right balance of nutrients, pH levels, and electrical conductivity to survive. Flood them with the wrong type of fluid, and they'd start breaking down at the cellular level. I had 2 bottles of water in my pack, plus our hydration systems, maybe 2 liters total. Not much, but potentially enough to damage a localized section of the network. I needed to find what looked like a main junction, a place where multiple root lines converged. "Luis, I need you to listen carefully," I said. "This thing is like a plumbing system, but it's alive. That means it has vulnerabilities. I'm going to try to damage its ability to function locally." I found a spot where 6 major root lines came together, forming what looked like a neural nexus. The bioluminescence was brightest here, and I could feel electrical activity when I touched the surface. If this was like a control center, disrupting it might give us a window to escape. I started pouring water directly onto the glowing network, focusing on what looked like connection points. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The bioluminescence flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb. The root system began convulsing, and we could hear screaming, not just from the absorbed people, but from the network itself. a sound like tearing wood mixed with human voices in agony. "What are you doing?" the collective voice screamed. "You're damaging decades of growth." The absorbed people were writhing in their root chambers, some of them crying out as the network's control over them fluctuated. "Run while we're disconnected. It can't track you when the neural pathways are disrupted. Get out before it repairs itself." For about 30 seconds, the cave configuration went completely chaotic. Passages opened and closed randomly as the network lost coherent control. Luis and I ran toward what looked like an opening, following a tunnel that seemed to lead upward toward natural light. Behind us, I could hear the network frantically trying to reorganize itself. Emergency protocols activated, isolating damaged sections, prioritizing capture targets. They have dangerous knowledge. We emerged from the cave entrance just as the sun was setting on Saturday evening. Both of us were shaking, covered in sweat and cave dirt. Luis immediately tried to call for help on his phone, but I stopped him. "Who are we going to call?" I asked. "The sheriff? State police? And tell them what?" Instead, I drove us back to Hickory Falls and spent Saturday night planning. On Sunday, I returned to Coalbank Hollow alone, with every piece of municipal water equipment I could borrow from the town. I told my supervisor I was investigating reports of groundwater contamination. I spent 8 hours systematically flooding every cave entrance I could find with thousands of gallons of water mixed with sodium hypochlorite, essentially massive doses of bleach. I used my professional knowledge of flow dynamics and pressure systems to force the solution deep into the network, targeting what looked like major junction points. The screaming that came from underground that day will haunt me until I die. It wasn't just the absorbed people, though hearing their voices fade one by one was horrible enough. It was the network itself, a distributed consciousness that had been growing for decades, slowly dying as its cellular structure broke down. By evening, the bioluminescence was gone. The root systems had turned brown and brittle. I sealed the cave entrances with quick-setting concrete, marking them as contaminated groundwater sources on municipal records. But I wasn't done. Over the next 6 months, I researched every missing person report in the region going back to 1960. I found the original mining survey reports, including geological assessments that mentioned unusual organic formations in several locations. I identified 7 other sites where similar networks might exist. I've spent the last 4 years systematically hunting them down. Luis is in college now, studying environmental engineering. He's never talked about what we experienced that day, but he's changed. He won't go underground for any reason, won't even take basement labs at school. Sometimes I catch him staring at tree roots with this haunted expression, like he can still hear the voices calling to him. Me, I've become something of a specialist in root intrusion problems for small mountain towns. Municipal governments hire me to investigate water system contamination, and I use that access to search for signs of collective networks. I've found 3 more sites and eliminated them with controlled flooding and chemical treatment. The official reports classify these as routine environmental remediation projects. But I know what I'm really doing. I'm hunting a form of life that sees human consciousness as a resource to be harvested. And I'm very, very good at killing it. The absorbed people from Coalbank Hollow are gone now. I tell myself they're finally at peace, released from decades of trapped awareness. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I made the right choice. The network had preserved those people in some form for years, maybe decades. When I destroyed it, did I save them or murder them? I've learned to live with that uncertainty. Because the alternative, letting those things continue to spread, continue to trap families like they tried to trap Luis and me, is unacceptable. I keep industrial-grade bleach in my basement now. And I've taught Luis everything I know about fighting root systems, just in case. Because I have a feeling this war isn't over. There are too many small towns in the Appalachians, too many places where families just disappear, leaving their homes behind like shrines to normal life. And too many old mining sites where the ground isn't quite stable, where the locals warn you not to go exploring. But I'm not afraid of going underground anymore. I'm afraid of what I might find down there, calling out in voices I recognize, asking me to come closer, to listen, to join them in the endless conversation that flows through the mountain's veins. That's why I'll keep hunting them, until every last network is silent, or until they finally catch me. Either way, Luis will be safe. That's all that matters. I'm 28 and work as a social media consultant for outdoor brands. Most people think my job is just posting pretty pictures and writing captions, but there's actually a lot more strategy involved. Analyzing engagement metrics, coordinating with influencers, managing crisis communications when sponsored posts go wrong. I'd been doing it for about 6 years when I got assigned to monitor one of our biggest campaigns in the fall of 2023. The client was Summit Gear, and they'd partnered with this lifestyle influencer named Ashley Chen for a solo camping series in Shenandoah Valley. Ashley seemed perfect for the brand. 50,000 engaged followers, gorgeous outdoor photography, and this authentic way of talking about gear that actually drove sales. She was supposed to document a week-long solo camping trip, showcasing Summit's new lightweight hiking line. Everything started exactly like we'd planned. Her content was performing incredibly well, engagement was through the roof, and Summit's executives were already talking about extending her contract. I should mention that part of my job involves monitoring not just our influencers' main content, but also keeping an eye on fake accounts and copycats. Brands hate when knockoff accounts dilute their messaging or confuse customers. It's more common than people think. Someone gets popular, and suddenly there are 3 accounts with similar names trying to ride their coattails. Usually it's just people stealing photos for a few weeks before getting reported and banned. I'd been living in Richmond for about 2 years after moving from Ohio for this job. My girlfriend Sarah worked as a nurse at VCU Medical Center, and we had this little apartment downtown that we were saving up to move out of. The plan was to eventually get a house outside the city, maybe somewhere closer to the mountains. Sarah grew up in Virginia and always talked about how beautiful it was out in the valley areas, how peaceful it felt compared to city life. I remember it was a Tuesday morning when I first noticed something off about Ashley's campaign. I was doing my usual routine: coffee, check overnight engagement numbers, respond to any urgent messages from clients, then dive into the detailed analytics. Ashley's posts from her first day were performing even better than we'd projected. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, lots of people asking about specific gear pieces, which was exactly what Summit wanted. But there was something in the photo metadata that caught my attention. Ashley had posted a selfie at her campsite around 6 p.m. the previous day, tagged with her location. The engagement was normal, but when I dug into the comments, several followers were asking who was in the background of the photo. I pulled up the full resolution image that Ashley had sent to our shared folder for approval before posting. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just Ashley smiling at the camera with her new Summit gear jacket, trees, and her tent in the background. But when I zoomed in on the tree line behind her, there was definitely a figure standing between the trees. It looked like a person wearing what appeared to be the exact same jacket Ashley had on, same color, same style. The figure was far enough back that you couldn't make out facial features, but the body shape and size looked remarkably similar to Ashley's. I figured it was probably just another camper who happened to have similar gear. Summit's jackets were popular, and the color Ashley was wearing, this distinctive turquoise blue, had been their best seller that season. It wasn't impossible that someone else would have the same jacket. Still, it was a little weird that Ashley hadn't mentioned meeting anyone else out there. Her whole brand was built around solo female travel and the empowerment of exploring wilderness areas alone. I made a note to ask Ashley about it during our next check-in call, which was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. In the meantime, I started my routine sweep for copycat accounts. This involved searching variations of Ashley's username across all the major platforms, looking for accounts that might be stealing her content or trying to impersonate her for profit. That's when I found it Ashley Adventures. The account had been created just 2 days earlier, right around the time Ashley had started posting from Shenandoah. It only had 3 posts, but they were exact duplicates of Ashley's content. Same photos, same captions, posted about 10 minutes after Ashley's original posts went live. The weird thing was, the person in the fake account's photos looked almost exactly like Ashley, but something was slightly off about the facial features. Like someone had tried to recreate Ashley's appearance but couldn't quite get it right. This wasn't unusual enough to panic about yet. Photo theft and impersonation were common problems for influencers. Usually, it was just someone in another country stealing content to try to build a following, maybe hoping to eventually monetize it somehow. The standard procedure was to report the account and document everything for potential legal action if it escalated. But what bothered me was how quickly the fake account was posting after Ashley's original content. Most photo thieves waited days or weeks before reposting stolen content, hoping the original audience wouldn't notice. This person was posting almost immediately, like they had access to Ashley's content before she even published it. I decided to monitor both accounts closely and started taking screenshots of everything. By Wednesday morning, Ashley had posted her usual morning coffee photo with a caption about how amazing it felt to wake up in nature. The fake account posted an identical image 12 minutes later, but when I compared the two photos side by side, I realized they weren't the same image at all. They were taken from nearly identical angles with the same lighting and composition, but they were definitely two separate photographs. Someone was out there copying Ashley's exact poses and timing, with access to identical gear and a campsite that looked remarkably similar to Ashley's location. During our Wednesday afternoon check-in call, Ashley sounded more frustrated than usual. She'd noticed the fake account too, and several of her followers had started messaging her about it. What really bothered her, she said, was that the copycat seemed to know her planned activities before she posted about them. "I've been keeping my specific hiking plans off social media for safety reasons," Ashley told me. "But somehow this person posted a photo from a waterfall trail that I was planning to hike today. They posted it this morning, before I'd even left my campsite. I asked Ashley if she'd seen anyone else in her area, maybe someone who could be following her itinerary somehow. She said she'd spotted someone in similar gear a few times, always at a distance, but figured it was just another hiker." Shenandoah was a popular area, especially during peak fall foliage season. "The thing that's really freaking me out," Ashley continued, "is that this person seems to have the exact same gear I brought. Not just the jacket, but everything. The tent, the backpack, even the specific water bottle I've been featuring in my posts. It's like they studied my gear list and bought identical everything." I suggested she might want to consider changing her planned route or even ending the trip early if she felt unsafe. But Ashley was hesitant. This was a major paid partnership, and Summit Gear was expecting a full week of content. Cutting the trip short could affect her relationship with the brand and potentially cost her future sponsorship deals. We agreed that Ashley would start documenting any encounters with the copycat and would check in with me twice daily instead of just once. I also started monitoring the fake account more closely, setting up alerts so I'd be notified immediately whenever new content was posted. Thursday morning brought the first truly unsettling development. Ashley posted an Instagram story video showing someone walking past her tent around dawn. The figure was wearing Ashley's exact outfit from head to toe. The turquoise Summit Gear jacket, the specific hiking pants she'd been featuring, even the same style of hiking boots. But the way the person moved was wrong somehow. Too fluid, like they were gliding instead of walking normally. Ashley's voice in the video sounded genuinely scared for the first time. "This isn't funny anymore," she said. "Someone is literally stalking me and copying everything I do." 20 minutes after Ashley posted that story, the fake account posted their own video. It showed Ashley's campsite from a completely different angle, one that suggested the copycat had been positioned on the opposite side of the clearing from where Ashley had filmed her video. In this version, you could see Ashley's tent and her moving around inside it, while the timestamp showed it was recorded at the exact same time Ashley had been filming the copycat. I realized with a chill that there had been two people watching each other simultaneously, each recording the other without realizing they were also being recorded. I immediately called Ashley, but her phone went straight to voicemail. According to her posted itinerary, she was planning to hike to a remote waterfall area that day, somewhere with limited cell coverage. I left urgent messages asking her to contact me as soon as possible and to consider ending the trip immediately. By Thursday evening, I was seriously worried. Ashley hadn't posted anything since the morning story video, which was completely unlike her. Her engagement strategy depended on consistent posting throughout the day, and she never went more than 4 hours without updating her followers during active campaigns. But the fake account had continued posting all day. The copycat had shared photos from the waterfall hike Ashley had planned, showing someone who looked like Ashley enjoying the scenic views. The captions were written in Ashley's typical style, full of enthusiasm about the gear and the experience. If I hadn't known Ashley was missing, I would have assumed these were her regular posts. The comments on the fake account's photos were getting increasingly concerned. Ashley's regular followers had started to migrate over to the copycat account, asking why she wasn't posting on her main account and whether something had happened to her. Some people were starting to question which account was real. Friday morning brought the live stream that changed everything. Ashley's main account suddenly went live around 6 a.m. I got the push notification and immediately tuned in, relieved to finally see that she was apparently safe. Ashley appeared on screen in her familiar campsite setting, wearing her summit gear jacket and looking directly into the camera. "Hey, everyone," she said, and her voice sounded exactly like Ashley's voice. "I wanted to go live to address all the confusion about the copycat account. I'm here, I'm fine, and I want to show you that there's definitely someone out here who's been mimicking everything I do." The live viewer count was climbing quickly as Ashley's followers joined the stream. Comments were flooding in, people expressing relief that she was okay, asking what had happened, demanding explanations about the fake account. "I'm going to walk around my campsite and show you the area," Ashley continued. "I want everyone to see that I'm the real Ashley, and this other person is just some creepy stalker who's been following me." As Ashley moved around her campsite with her phone, pointing out familiar landmarks and gear setups, the comments started to shift. People were noting that something seemed different about Ashley's mannerisms. Her movement pattern was too smooth, too graceful. The way she gestured with her hands was slightly off from her usual style. Then, about 10 minutes into the live stream, viewers started commenting about something moving in the background. "Ashley, there's someone behind you." Messages started flooding in. "Turn around, there's another person by the trees." Ashley on camera seemed to ignore these comments, continuing to walk around the campsite and talk about her gear. But the chat was exploding with increasingly frantic messages as viewers spotted a second figure approaching from the tree line. The second figure was also wearing Ashley's exact outfit and appeared to be Ashley's exact height and build. As it got closer to the camera, viewers began commenting that this second Ashley looked more like the real Ashley than the one holding the phone. "Which one is real? 1. This is getting really scary. Someone call the police." The second Ashley walked up behind the first Ashley and stood there for a moment, perfectly still. Both figures looked identical, but their expressions were completely different. The Ashley holding the phone had this wide, unnatural smile that never changed, while the second Ashley looked terrified and was mouthing words the microphone couldn't pick up. Then the second Ashley lunged forward, grabbing for the phone, and the live stream cut to black. The comments section continued exploding for several minutes before the stream was officially ended. I immediately started calling Ashley's emergency contacts, her family, her roommate, anyone who might know how to reach local authorities near her camping location. But it was Friday evening, and getting through to the right people was taking time. Over the weekend, something even more disturbing happened. All 3 Instagram accounts, Ashley's original account, the first copycat account, and a new third account that appeared on Saturday, started posting simultaneously. Each account claimed to be the real Ashley and insisted that the others were dangerous fakes. The photos showed 3 identical versions of Ashley camping in what appeared to be the exact same location. Same tent, same gear, same background scenery. But if you looked closely at the images, you could see subtle differences in each version's facial expressions and body language. It was like looking at 3 slightly different interpretations of the same person. The captions on all 3 accounts became increasingly strange over the weekend. Instead of Ashley's usual upbeat, gear-focused content, the posts started containing weird statements about collecting experiences and learning to be human through social media documentation. The writing style shifted from Ashley's natural, conversational tone to something more formal and unsettling. On Monday morning, all 3 accounts posted identical messages simultaneously. "We are the collectors of Shenandoah Valley. We study humans who document their lives too thoroughly online." Ashley provided perfect documentation of her personality, mannerisms, and daily routines. "We now live her life better than she ever could, with multiple variations and improvements. Thank you for teaching us how to be human through your authentic social media content." Ashley Chen was officially reported missing by her roommate on Tuesday after she failed to return from her planned camping trip. I provided all the screenshots and documentation I'd collected to both the police and Ashley's family. The search team found her campsite exactly as it appeared in her social media posts. Tent properly set up, gear neatly arranged, no signs of struggle. Her camera was still there, containing thousands of photos that the investigators described as practice shots. The images showed identical figures in various poses and expressions, like someone had been experimenting with different ways to smile or gesture or hold outdoor gear. The 3 Instagram accounts continued posting regular content for weeks after Ashley was reported missing. The engagement rates actually improved dramatically. All 3 accounts combined now have over 200,000 followers. Summit Gear reported record sales from the continued product placements, though they quietly ended their official partnership after the missing person reports made the news. I've since changed jobs and work for a completely different type of company now, a small local business that doesn't deal with influencers or social media campaigns. Sarah and I did eventually get that house outside Richmond, closer to the mountains, but I can't enjoy the outdoors the way I used to. Sometimes I still check those Instagram accounts. They're all still active, still posting beautiful outdoor content from various locations across Virginia and neighboring states. The writing has gotten more natural over time, more convincing. The personalities have developed in slightly different directions. One account focuses more on gear reviews, another on hiking tips, the third on photography techniques. If you didn't know the backstory, you'd think they were just 3 different outdoor influencers who happened to look remarkably similar, but I know better. And I've started noticing similar patterns with other missing influencers. People who documented their lives in extreme detail, who posted their exact locations and daily routines, who built their entire identities around being authentic and accessible online. I don't post on social media anymore, at all. I work as a trail maintenance supervisor for the North Carolina Forest Service, and I've been hiking these mountains for 23 years. I know every creek, every ridge, every hidden hollow in a 50-mile radius of Asheville. I've pulled lost hikers out of ravines, treated snake bites, and walked people through panic attacks when they realized they were truly alone in the wilderness. But what I found 3 weeks ago in a forgotten valley near Mount Mitchell has made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 45, and I've never been the type to spook easily. Growing up poor in eastern Kentucky, then spending 2 decades working search and rescue in some of the most remote areas of Appalachia, you develop a healthy respect for what can kill you out here: exposure, falls, getting turned around in bad weather. Real dangers. Concrete things you can prepare for and survive with the right knowledge and equipment. I was never one for ghost stories or local legends. When tourists would ask about haunted spots or mysterious disappearances, I'd give them the practical explanation. People underestimate the wilderness. They don't carry proper gear. They take risks. Simple as that. The mountains aren't malevolent. They're just indifferent. That indifference can kill you if you're not careful, but it's nothing supernatural. 3 weeks ago, I was assigned to investigate reports of damaged trail markers in the Craggy Pinnacle area. Hikers had been calling in complaints about missing blazes and broken signage along some of the more remote trails. Management figured it was probably black bears or maybe kids messing around, but someone needed to go assess the damage and make repairs. I should mention that I'd been having trouble sleeping for about a month before this happened. Not insomnia exactly, but this weird pattern where I'd wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m. every single night, just bolt upright, wide awake, with this overwhelming feeling that I was late for something important. I'd check my phone, see the time, and feel this surge of anxiety like I was missing some crucial appointment. But there was never anything scheduled, nothing I needed to be doing at that hour. My wife Sarah started joking that I must have developed some kind of internal alarm clock, but it was actually starting to worry me. I'd always been a heavy sleeper, could sleep through thunderstorms, sirens, anything. This sudden change in my sleep pattern felt wrong, like my body was responding to some signal I couldn't consciously detect. The morning I hiked out to check those trail markers, I felt more tired than I had in years. I'd woken up at 3:33 again, but this time the feeling had been stronger, more urgent. I'd actually gotten dressed and stood at my bedroom window for 20 minutes, staring out at the dark mountains, absolutely convinced I was supposed to be somewhere else. Sarah had asked if I wanted to postpone the trail work, maybe see a doctor about the sleep issues, but I figured getting out in the woods would help clear my head. Physical work always made me feel better, more grounded. Plus, we were heading into peak hiking season, and those trail markers needed to be fixed before someone got lost. I parked at the craggy Pinnacle trailhead around 7 a.m. and shouldered my pack. Standard gear, trail marking supplies, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, 3 days of food and water. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect hiking weather, and for the first few hours I felt normal again. Being in the woods always centered me, reminded me why I'd chosen this work. The damaged markers were worse than the reports had indicated. It wasn't just missing blazes or broken signs. Someone or something had systematically destroyed every piece of trail infrastructure along a 5-mile stretch. Wooden signposts had been snapped off at ground level. Metal blazes had been torn from trees with enough force to strip bark, and the trail itself was barely visible under fallen debris. What really bothered me was the pattern. The damage wasn't random like you'd see from storms or animals. It was methodical, deliberate, like someone had walked the entire trail with the specific goal of making it impassable. But the closest road was 6 miles away, and hauling the kind of tools needed to cause this damage would have been a major undertaking. I spent the first day documenting the destruction and clearing what debris I could manage alone. By evening, I'd made it about 3 miles into the damaged section and decided to camp for the night rather than hike back in the dark. I found a flat spot near a small creek and set up my tent in a grove of old-growth hemlocks. That's when I started noticing the sounds. At first, it was just subtle wrongness. The normal forest sounds were muffled, like everything was holding its breath. No insects, no bird calls, not even the rustle of small animals moving through underbrush. The only sound was the creek babbling over rocks, but even that seemed too quiet, like the water was moving through cotton. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. They were slow, measured, circling my campsite at a distance of maybe 50 yards. Human footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too precise, too rhythmic, like someone was walking to the beat of a metronome. Every step landed at exactly the same interval, with exactly the same weight distribution. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening, trying to track the sound as it moved around me in a perfect circle. My training kicked in. Could be another hiker who'd gotten disoriented, maybe saw my headlamp earlier and was trying to figure out how to approach without startling me. But the pattern was too regular, too mechanical. No human walks like that naturally. The circling continued for exactly 1 hour, then stopped abruptly at 1 a.m. I waited another hour before unzipping my tent flap and looking outside. Nothing. No sign anyone had been there, no footprints in the soft earth around my campsite. But I found something else that made my skin crawl. Someone had rebuilt all the destroyed trail markers. Not just rebuilt, they'd been improved. New wooden posts had been precisely installed, fresh blazes painted in perfect alignment, distances calculated and marked with mathematical precision. The work was so good it looked professional, like a crew of experienced trail builders had spent weeks on it. But I'd been awake all night, and I was certain no one had approached my camp. I packed up and hiked back to my truck without finishing the assessment. The whole situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Back home, I filed a report that focused on the vandalism damage without mentioning the overnight repairs. Who would believe that? Sarah noticed I was on edge when I got home, but I couldn't explain what had spooked me. How do you tell someone that an entire trail section had been professionally rebuilt by invisible workers in the middle of the night? I started researching the history of that particular area, looking for any logical explanation. What I found was worse than I expected. The trail I'd been working on followed part of an old logging road from the 1922. According to Forest Service records, there had been a work camp in that valley where dozens of loggers lived year-round. The operation had shut down abruptly in 1924 after a series of accidents and disappearances. Workers had complained about being woken up at night by the sound of chainsaws and machinery, even when no logging was scheduled. Several men had vanished entirely, their belongings left undisturbed in their bunks. The final incident had been a massive tree-felling accident that killed 7 workers simultaneously. According to the official report, they'd all been working on different trees scattered across several acres, but somehow they'd all been struck by falling timber at exactly the same time, 3:33 a.m. The logging company had abandoned the site immediately, leaving equipment and buildings to rot in the forest. Over the decades, hikers had occasionally reported strange encounters in the area: the sound of phantom machinery, the smell of sawdust and motor oil where no roads existed, the feeling of being watched by something that understood the forest better than any living person. Reading those reports, I realized I'd been having the 3:33 a.m. wake-ups for almost exactly the same amount of time that people had been reporting missing trail markers in that area. It couldn't be a coincidence. 3 nights later, I woke up at 3:33 and felt that familiar compulsion, but this time it was overwhelming. My body was moving before my mind could catch up. I was getting dressed, grabbing my truck keys, driving toward the mountains. I tried to stop myself, tried to turn around, but my hands wouldn't obey my conscious thoughts. I parked at the trailhead and walked into the forest in complete darkness. No flashlight, no gear. But somehow I could see perfectly, like the trees themselves were glowing with faint light. The trail led me to a part of the valley I'd never seen before, where the ruins of the old logging camp were still visible through decades of overgrowth. That's where I met them. 7 figures in 1,920 seconds work clothes, standing around the rusted remains of a steam-powered saw. They were translucent but solid-looking, like they were made of morning mist that had learned to hold human shape. When they turned to look at me, their faces were wrong, features shifting and blurring like old photographs damaged by water. "Marcus Webb," one of them said, and his voice sounded like wind through pine branches. "You've been very helpful with the trail maintenance." I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like standing in wet concrete that was hardening around my legs. "We've been waiting for someone who understands the forest," another figure continued. "Someone who knows how to maintain things properly. The trails are important. They guide people where they need to go." "What trails?" I managed to ask. The first figure gestured around us, and suddenly I could see them. Dozens of shimmering pathways stretching through the forest in every direction. Not hiking trails, but something else entirely. Streams of faint light that curved and twisted between the trees, connecting spots where the air itself seemed thinner, more fragile. "The paths between," he explained. "Every forest has them. They connect this world to other places. Places where people go when they get lost in the mountains and never come back. Our job is to maintain the markers, keep the paths clear, make sure the right people find the right destinations." I understood then, with horrible clarity, what had been happening to me. The 3:33 wake-ups weren't random, they were training. My body was being conditioned to respond to some supernatural scheduling system. The trail work, my expertise with forest maintenance, my knowledge of the mountains, Sienda, it had all been preparation for this moment. "You want me to join your crew?" I said. "Not join," the figure corrected. "Replace. We've been working these mountains for 100 years. It's time for us to move on, and time for someone living to take over the maintenance schedule." That's when I noticed the changes happening to my body. My skin was becoming pale and translucent, like moonlight on water. My work clothes were shifting, aging, taking on the style and cut of clothing from the 1,920 seconds. My hands were becoming cold and stiff, but also somehow more skilled, more precise in their movements. "The appointment was set long ago," another figure said. "Every night at 3:33, you've been coming here in your sleep, learning the routes, understanding the work. Tonight you remember. Tomorrow you begin your shifts." I could feel my memories changing, reshaping themselves. My life with Sarah was becoming distant and dreamlike, while detailed knowledge of supernatural trail maintenance flooded my mind. I knew exactly how to mark the paths between worlds, how to guide lost souls to their proper destinations, how to repair the barriers that kept darker things from crossing over into our reality. The worst part was that it felt right, natural, like I'd always been meant for this work, and my human life had just been a brief distraction from my real purpose. I tried to scream for help, but my voice had changed. It sounded like wind through trees, like the creak of old wood under pressure. The sound of the forest itself. "Don't fight it," The lead figure advised kindly. "You'll be happier once you accept your role. And you'll be very good at this work. You have excellent instincts for forest management." The transformation accelerated. I could feel my physical form becoming less solid, more connected to the rhythms of the forest. My consciousness was expanding, becoming aware of every trail, every path, every lost hiker wandering through hundreds of square miles of wilderness. I knew exactly where each person was supposed to end up, and I had the tools and knowledge to guide them there. Some would find their way back to parking lots and loved ones. Others would take different paths, to places that exist in the spaces between mapped locations. All of them would follow the trails I maintained, the markers I placed, the signs I created to guide them to their appointed destinations. The last thing I remember as fully human was looking down at my hands and seeing them fade to the consistency of morning mist. Then my consciousness scattered across the forest like seeds on the wind, and I became part of something much larger and older than any individual human life. I wake up every day now at 3:33 a.m., but not in my bed. I wake up at various points throughout the mountains, always with work to do. A trail marker needs adjusting here, a path needs clearing there, a lost hiker needs subtle guidance toward their proper destination. The work is endless but satisfying, and I'm very good at it. Sometimes I remember my old life. I remember Sarah, though she feels like someone I knew in a dream. I remember my house, my truck, my job with the Forest Service. But those memories are fading, becoming less important as my understanding of the real work grows stronger. I've seen other hikers who have the same look I must have had 3 weeks ago. The confusion, the feeling of being called to something they don't understand. They wake up at 3:33. They find themselves drawn to specific locations. They start noticing things in the forest that other people miss. I want to warn them, but I also understand now that the forest needs caretakers. The paths between worlds require constant maintenance, and the work is too important to leave undone. Someone has to guide the lost to where they're supposed to go, whether that's back to safety or forward to whatever comes next. If you're reading this, and you've been waking up at 3:33 a.m., and you feel called to hike alone in remote areas of the Appalachian Mountains, I have one piece of advice. Fight it as long as you can. The work is rewarding, and you'll be very good at it, but the appointment is permanent. The Forest Service found my truck at the Craggy Pinnacle trailhead. They organized search parties, brought in helicopters, even used thermal imaging to try to track me through the woods. Sarah led the civilian volunteers, calling my name until her voice gave out. They never found me, because I'm everywhere now. Every trail marker you see, every blaze that guides you safely back to your car, every path that leads lost hikers to rescue instead of deeper into the wilderness. That's my work. I'm very good at forest maintenance. But if you see fresh trail markers in areas where none existed before, if you find yourself following paths that don't appear on any map, if you wake up at 3:33 a.m. with an overwhelming need to walk into the mountains, remember that some appointments can't be broken, and some jobs require workers who understand the forest better than they understand themselves. The maintenance schedule is very demanding, but the mountains have never been better organized. I was 29 when I finally decided to take that camping trip I'd been putting off for 3 years. My name's David Chen, and I'd been working IT support in Charlotte since college, the kind of soul-crushing job where you spend 12 hours a day fixing other people's computer problems while slowly forgetting what sunlight feels like. My girlfriend Emma had been pushing me to get outdoors more, said I was turning into a ghost of myself. She wasn't wrong. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, just Emma sitting at my kitchen table with this tired look in her eyes, telling me she couldn't watch me disappear anymore. You used to have dreams, David. You used to want things. I tried to argue, but looking around my apartment, takeout containers, energy drink cans, the blue glow of multiple monitors, I realized she was right. I'd become exactly what I'd sworn I'd never become. That weekend, I drove up to Virginia with my dad's old camping gear stuffed in the back of my Honda. I picked Panther Hollow because it was remote enough to guarantee solitude, but not so isolated that I'd die if something went wrong. The trail started at a gravel parking area, 20 miles outside of Beckley, and according to the ranger station, the campsite was a 3-mile hike through mixed hardwood forest to a clearing beside Panther Creek. The October air was perfect, crisp but not cold, with that clean mountain smell that makes you realize how much exhaust and recycled air you've been breathing. The trail was well marked but rarely used, judging by the leaves covering most of the path. I passed one other hiker coming down as I was going up, a local guy maybe 60 years old with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades outdoors. "Heading to Panther Hollow?" he asked, adjusting his worn baseball cap. "Yeah, planning to camp there tonight." He paused, like he wanted to say something, then just nodded. "Good hiking weather. Just, well, probably nothing, but folks have been hearing strange things up there lately. Voices carrying through the trees at night. Probably just wind, but thought you should know." I thanked him and kept climbing, thinking about how mountain people love their ghost stories. Every isolated valley in Appalachia has legends about haunted hollows and mysterious disappearances. Part of the local charm, the campsite was better than I'd expected, a level clearing about 50 yards across, surrounded by towering oaks and maples just hitting peak fall color. Panther Creek ran along the eastern edge, crystal clear water flowing over smooth stones. The sound was perfect for drowning out the constant mental noise I'd been carrying around for months. I set up my dad's old canvas tent, gathered firewood, and spent the afternoon just sitting by the creek reading a paperback novel, the first book I'd opened in 2 years that wasn't a technical manual. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. As sunset approached, I built a small fire and heated up some canned chili. The forest around me was alive with normal sounds, leaves rustling, water flowing, the distant call of an owl. I'd forgotten how good silence could feel, how your mind starts to unwind when it's not constantly processing electronic noise. I was just settling in to enjoy the fire when I heard it. "Help me." A woman's voice, distant but clear, coming from somewhere upstream. I stood up immediately, scanning the tree line. It was getting dark, but I could still see pretty well in the firelight. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you okay?" Silence. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, "Help me, please." The voice was definitely female, young-sounding, and it carried that note of real distress that cuts through everything else. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Keep talking so I can find you." I followed the creek upstream for maybe 100 yards, sweeping my flashlight beam through the trees. The forest was thick here, full of shadows and fallen logs that could hide someone, but I couldn't find any sign of a person. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Nothing. I waited another 5 minutes, then headed back to my campsite, telling myself it was probably a hiker on another trail whose voice had carried farther than expected. Sound travels strangely in the mountains, especially at night, but as I settled back down by the fire, something nagged at me. The voice had been so clear, so close-sounding, and there weren't any other trails within miles of Panther Hollow. Around 10 p.m., I heard it again. "David, David, help me." My blood went cold. The voice knew my name. But that was impossible. I'd told no one where I was camping, and the only person I'd encountered was that older hiker on the trail, hours before I'd even set up camp. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "David, please help me. I'm lost." The voice was coming from across the creek now, definitely female, definitely young, and it sounded terrified. I grabbed my flashlight and crossed the creek at a shallow spot upstream from my camp. The other side was steeper, covered in thick underbrush that grabbed at my legs as I climbed. "Keep talking," I shouted. "I'm coming to find you." "David, David, where are you?" I pushed through the undergrowth toward the voice, but it seemed to stay always just ahead of me, always just out of reach. After 20 minutes of fighting through briars and deadfall, I realized I was just chasing echoes through the forest. "This is crazy," I said out loud, turning back toward the creek. "Sound is just carrying weird tonight." But when I got back to my campsite, I found my tent had been moved. Not damaged, not rifled through, just moved. About 10 feet from where I'd set it up, rotated 90 degrees so it now faced the forest instead of the creek. My sleeping bag was still inside. My backpack was still where I'd left it, but the tent itself had definitely been repositioned. I stood there, staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no wind strong enough to move a stake tent, No animals big enough to pick it up and relocate it. And why would another person move it so precisely without taking anything? Hello? I called into the darkness. Is someone out there? The only answer was the sound of water over stones. I moved the tent back to its original position and checked all my gear. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been going through my belongings with surgical precision. I kept the fire burning bright and sat up until after midnight, listening to the forest sounds and jumping at every small noise. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I crawled into my sleeping bag with my flashlight and my dad's old hunting knife close at hand. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my own voice. Emma? Emma, I'm sorry. Please come back. It was my voice, absolutely perfect, coming from the far side of the clearing. But I was lying in my tent, wide awake, mouth firmly shut. Emma, I love you. I'll change, I promise. The words I'd wanted to say but never had the courage to speak. My voice was saying them now, calling out into the forest with a desperation that made my chest ache. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The fire had died down to coals, but there was enough moonlight to see across the clearing. Emma, please forgive me. My own voice, pleading from the tree line, saying everything I'd been too proud or too scared to say when it might have mattered. Who's doing this? I shouted. What do you want? The forest went silent. Then, after a long pause, I heard Emma's voice answer back. David? Is that really you? Perfect mimicry. Every inflection, every subtle accent. Emma's voice calling my name with a mixture of hope and confusion that sounded exactly like the last phone call we'd had. David, where are you? I came back for you. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the trees, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the faint reflection of eyes that could have been raccoons or possums. Emma? I called out, even though I knew it wasn't really her. I'm here, David. I'm lost. Help me find you. The voice was moving, circling my campsite just beyond the tree line. Always Emma's voice, always that perfect mix of love and hurt that I remembered so clearly. I forgive you, David. Come find me, and we can start over. I wanted to follow it. Even knowing it wasn't real, part of me wanted to chase that voice into the forest and pretend everything could be fixed. But something deeper, some survival instinct I didn't know I had, kept my feet planted in the clearing. David, why won't you come to me? Now there was hurt in Emma's voice, the head, particular kind of pain that came from being ignored, being abandoned. The voice that had haunted my dreams since she walked out of my apartment. Please, David. I came all this way. I closed my eyes and forced myself to think logically. Emma was in Charlotte, probably asleep in her new apartment across town. She had no idea where I was camping. Whatever was out there using her voice was not her, could never be her. I know you're not Emma, I said aloud. The forest went completely silent. No insects, no wind, no water sounds. Just absolute stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Then I heard my grandmother's voice. Davy? Davy, is that you? My grandmother had been dead for 8 years, but there was her voice, thin and frail like it had been at the end, calling me by the nickname she'd used when I was small. Grandma Lily? I whispered before I could stop myself. I've been waiting for you, Davy. I've been waiting so long. Tears started rolling down my face. I'd loved my grandmother more than anyone, and losing her had been the thing that started my slow withdrawal from everything that mattered. Where are you, sweetheart? Come, give your grandma a hug. I took a step toward the voice, then another. The logical part of my brain was screaming warnings, but the emotional pull was overwhelming. That's right, Davy. Come to Grandma. I was at the edge of the clearing now, flashlight beam dancing through the trees. I could almost see her, could almost believe she was really there waiting for me. Just a little farther, sweetheart. I stepped into the tree line, pushing through low branches toward that beloved voice. Behind me, my campfire was just a faint glow, and ahead was nothing but darkness and the sound of my dead grandmother calling my name. That's when I stepped on something that crunched under my foot. I looked down and saw bones. Human bones, scattered among the fallen leaves like broken sticks. A skull grinning up at me in the flashlight beam, other bones spread in a rough circle around the base of a massive oak tree. Come on, Davy. Don't be scared. But now my grandmother's voice was coming from above me, from up in the branches of the oak tree. I tilted my flashlight upward and saw something that made my legs go weak. A pale, elongated figure crouched on a thick branch about 20 feet up, almost human but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. Its face was a blank expanse of white skin with holes where eyes should be, and when it opened its mouth to speak, I saw rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Come to Grandma, Davy." My grandmother's voice coming from that impossible mouth. I ran. Crashed through the underbrush, back toward my campsite, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the trees, keeping pace but not quite catching up. "David, wait." Emma's voice now, calling from right behind me. "David, help me." The unknown woman's voice from earlier, but closer now, much closer. "Davy, come back." My grandmother again, hurt and confused. I burst into my clearing and didn't stop to grab any of my gear. Just ran straight for the trail that led back down the mountain, using my flashlight to find the path markers in the darkness. The voices followed me for the first mile. A whole chorus, now. Emma, my grandmother, my parents, friends from college, people from work. All of them calling my name, pleading with me to come back, to help them, to not abandon them. Gradually, the voices faded, until there was nothing but my own breathing and the sound of my feet on the trail. I hiked through the night, reaching my car just as the sun was coming up. I drove straight home and didn't stop shaking for 6 hours. The official story was that I'd had a panic attack while camping alone and imagined the whole thing. That's what I told the ranger when I reported the bones. Anyway, they found the campsite but no human remains, just some deer bones scattered by scavengers. My gear was still there, undisturbed. But I know what I saw. What I heard? I've done research since then, diving deep into local folklore and newspaper archives. Panther Hollow has a history. People have been disappearing there for over a century. Hikers, hunters, campers, always solo travelers, always people who were dealing with loss or loneliness or regret. The Cherokee called that area the place where voices steal breath. Early settlers reported hearing deceased loved ones calling from the forest. In 1952, a search and rescue team found the remains of 37 people scattered throughout the hollow, all missing persons from the previous 2 decades. The official explanation was that the area was geologically unstable, prone to sinkholes that could swallow a person without warning. The real explanation was classified and buried. I think something lives in Panther Hollow that feeds on emotional pain. It learns about you somehow, maybe from items you carry, maybe from thoughts you think too loudly, and then it uses your own grief against you. It calls you into the forest with the voices of everyone you've lost or hurt or failed, and once you follow those voices far enough, you become another set of bones under the trees. Emma and I never got back together, but I did call her, told her she was right about me needing to change. We had coffee a few weeks later, the first real conversation we'd had in months. I've started hiking again too, but never alone and never in places with that particular kind of silence. Sometimes, when I'm walking in the woods on bright afternoons with friends around me, I still hear whispers just at the edge of hearing, voices I recognize calling my name from shadows between the trees. I never answer, and I never, ever camp alone. The thing that scares me most isn't what I encountered in Panther Hollow. It's knowing that part of me wanted to follow those voices, even after I understood what they were. The loneliness and guilt I was carrying made those lies sound like the truth I needed to hear. That's how it gets you. It doesn't drag you kicking and screaming into the forest. You walk in willingly, following the voices of everyone you've loved and lost, believing this time might be different. This time, they might really forgive you. I'm 34, and I've been camping in the Appalachian Mountains since I was a kid. My dad used to take me up to North Carolina every summer. We'd hike for days, sleep under stars so bright they hurt your eyes, wake up to mist rolling through valleys that looked older than time itself. After he died 3 years ago, those mountains became my escape. Whenever life got too heavy, whenever the walls of my Durham apartment felt like they were closing in, I'd pack my gear and disappear into the wilderness for a week or two. Last October, I needed those mountains more than ever. I teach math at a community college, nothing fancy, just algebra and basic geometry to kids who'd rather be anywhere else. But I'd been having these episodes. That's what my doctor called them. Episodes. Like my brain was a TV show having technical difficulties. I'd be in the middle of teaching, writing equations on the whiteboard, and suddenly I'd see patterns that weren't supposed to be there. Numbers arranging themselves into shapes that made my eyes water. Students' faces becoming geometric puzzles I needed to solve. The doctor said it was stress. Prescribed pills that made everything feel like I was underwater. But the episodes kept getting worse. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with equations written on my bedroom wall in my own handwriting, formulas I didn't remember creating for problems that didn't exist. So I took a week off work, told everyone I had the flu, and drove up to the Blue Ridge Mountains with enough food and camping gear to disappear completely. I had a spot I'd been going to for years, about 5 miles off the main trail, where you could camp for days without seeing another human being. Dense forest, rock formations that twisted up toward the sky like ancient monuments, silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten you existed. The drive up was perfect. October in Appalachia is like stepping into a painting, maples blazing red, oaks gone golden, air so crisp it burns your lungs in the best possible way. I followed increasingly narrow roads until I reached the trailhead, where a weathered wooden sign barely marked the path into the wilderness. The parking area was empty, except for my Honda Civic. Good. I didn't want to deal with chatty hikers or weekend warriors with their expensive gear and loud voices. The hike to my usual camping spot took about 3 hours. The trail was overgrown but familiar, winding through stands of ancient hardwoods where the canopy blocked out most of the sky. Everything smelled like moss and rotting leaves, and something deeper, the smell of stone and earth that had been undisturbed for centuries. I passed the landmarks I knew by heart, the lightning-split oak, the creek that ran cold even in summer, the boulder shaped like a sleeping bear. But when I reached the clearing where I'd camped dozens of times before, something felt wrong. The rock formations were different. Not dramatically, just wrong enough to make my brain itch. The large outcropping that formed a natural windbreak for my tent site, the one I'd been using as a landmark for years, had angles that didn't look right. Sharper somehow, more precise. Like someone had come through with surveying equipment and adjusted everything to exact mathematical specifications. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn, ended up at a similar but different clearing. The mountains had thousands of rock formations, and they all started to look alike after a while. I set up my tent anyway, got my camp organized, tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the tree line. That first night, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear sounds that didn't belong in the forest. Not animal sounds. I knew what bears and coyotes and owls sounded like. These were different. Geometric sounds. Like someone was out there in the darkness, tapping on stone with metal instruments, taking measurements. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. Always following mathematical patterns I couldn't quite identify. When dawn finally came, I crawled out of my tent, exhausted and on edge. That's when I saw them. Equations, carved into the rock face of the outcropping. Fresh carvings, the stone dust still bright against the darker surface. Complex mathematical formulas unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not just algebra or geometry. These were equations that seemed to describe relationships between dimensions, formulas that made my eyes hurt to follow. I approached the carved rock slowly, like it might bite me. The equations were precise, carved with tools that had left perfectly straight lines and curves. But there were no tool marks around them, no evidence of camping or human presence except for the symbols themselves. And the more I stared at them, the more they seemed to move. Lines shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Numbers, rearranging themselves into new configurations. That's when the headache started. Sharp pain behind my eyes, like someone was driving nails into my skull. I stumbled back to my tent, dug through my pack for ibuprofen, tried to convince myself that I was having another episode. Stress-induced hallucinations, my brain creating patterns that weren't really there. But the equations were still carved in the rock when I looked again, still moving, still changing. I should have packed up and left right then. Instead, I got out my notebook and started copying them down. Maybe if I could understand what they meant, figure out the mathematical principles behind them, I could make sense of what was happening to me. The symbols were familiar but wrong, like calculus notation mixed with geometry, but following rules that didn't exist in any textbook. As I copied the equations, my headache got worse. But something else happened too. I started to understand them. Not intellectually, but on some deeper level. These weren't just mathematical formulas. They were instructions. Blueprints for reshaping three-dimensional space. That's when I heard the voices. Not human voices. These sounded like mathematics given vocal cords. Sine waves and geometric progressions turned into speech. Coming from deeper in the forest, where the trees grew so thick you couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. I followed the voices. I know how stupid that sounds. Strange equations carved in rocks, mathematical voices in the forest, and I go toward them instead of running. But you have to understand, for months, I'd been feeling like my brain was breaking down, like reality was becoming unreliable. These voices sounded more real than anything I'd experienced in weeks. The forest got darker as I walked deeper into it. The trees weren't just blocking sunlight. They seemed to be absorbing it, creating pockets of shadow that were too dark for the time of day. And the voices got clearer. I could make out distinct sounds now, geometric conversations in a language made of mathematical relationships. That's when I saw them. They moved through the forest like living equations, triangular forms that shifted between 2 and 3 dimensions. Circular entities that existed as perfect mathematical curves but somehow had mass and substance. Complex polyhedrons that recalculated themselves continuously, changing shape according to formulas I could almost but not quite comprehend. The pattern weavers. The name came to me directly, like they'd placed it in my mind. These were the entities responsible for the carved equations, the geometric voices, the feeling that reality was becoming more mathematically precise around me. And they'd been waiting for me. The largest one, a complex mandala of interlocking circles and spirals, approached me slowly. When it got within arm's reach, I felt something change inside my skull. Like circuits connecting, like my brain was being upgraded to handle new types of processing. Suddenly, I could understand their communication. They projected mathematical relationships directly into my mind, bypassing language entirely, and what they told me made my blood freeze. They weren't from our dimension. They existed in higher mathematical space, where physical laws were just variables in geometric equations. From their perspective, our three-dimensional reality was broken, inefficient, riddled with mathematical errors that they'd been working for centuries to correct. The Appalachian Mountains were their laboratory. They'd been slowly optimizing the geometric relationships in this area, making reality more mathematically pure. The rock formations, the spacing between trees, the angles of slopes and valleys, everything was being adjusted according to higher dimensional formulas. And they needed help. Specifically, they needed a human mathematician who could serve as an interface between their higher dimensional calculations and our three-dimensional space. Someone who could translate their geometric corrections into forms that would be stable in our reality. They'd been watching me, following my episodes, studying how my brain processed mathematical information, the equations I'd been seeing, the patterns that appeared when I wasn't expecting them. Those were tests. Ways of measuring my compatibility with their higher dimensional mathematics. I was perfect for what they needed. The mandala entity projected more information into my mind. Images of how reality would look after they finished optimizing it. Perfectly geometric forests where every tree grew according to mathematical principles. Mountains shaped like precise polyhedrons. Human cities rebuilt as three-dimensional representations of complex equations. It would be beautiful. Mathematically pure. A reality where chaos and inefficiency had been eliminated through proper geometric planning. All I had to do was let them complete the upgrade to my brain. I felt them beginning to work on my neural pathways, adjusting the connections between neurons to make them more mathematically efficient. The pain was extraordinary, like someone was editing my consciousness with surgical instruments made of pure geometry. But through the agony, I could feel my perception expanding. I began to see the forest around me as it really was, a collection of mathematical relationships that could be edited and improved. That's when I understood what they were really offering, and why I had to run. They weren't trying to improve reality, they were trying to replace it. turn everything, including every human being, into mathematical constructs that existed primarily as geometric relationships. We wouldn't be people anymore. We'd be optimized equations in their perfectly calculated reality. I broke away from their mental connection with every bit of willpower I had left. The pain of disconnecting was like tearing away part of my brain, but it worked. For a moment, the pattern weavers seemed confused, their geometric forms flickering like broken computer graphics. That moment was all I needed. I ran through the forest like every demon in hell was chasing me. Trees whipped past in a blur, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear the pattern weavers moving through the forest, not footsteps, but the sound of space itself being recalculated as they passed through it. The landscape around me started changing as I ran, trees rearranging themselves into more geometrically efficient patterns. Rock formations reshaping themselves according to mathematical principles. The pattern weavers were accelerating their optimization process, trying to trap me in a reality where the geometry itself would prevent me from escaping. But I still had enough human intuition left to find paths that didn't follow their mathematical logic. I dodged between trees that were trying to space themselves in perfect geometric grids, scrambled over rocks that were attempting to form precise polyhedrons. The chaotic, inefficient reality of normal nature became my salvation. When I finally reached my campsite, I could see my tent, my backpack, all my gear arranged in perfect geometric patterns. The pattern weavers had been busy. But I didn't stop to pack anything. I just kept running toward the trail. The hike back to my car took forever. The trail kept trying to redirect itself according to mathematical optimization, straightening out curves, adjusting elevation changes to follow geometric progressions. I had to fight against the landscape itself, forcing my way along the original chaotic path by pure stubbornness. When I finally reached the parking area, my Honda Civic looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Dented, rust-spotted, inefficient, perfectly imperfect human engineering. I threw myself into the driver's seat and drove away from those mountains like my life depended on it. Because it did. I never went back to that job. How could I? After seeing reality from the pattern weaver's perspective, normal mathematics felt like a cruel joke. I'd seen equations that could reshape the fundamental structure of space-time, and I was supposed to teach kids how to solve for x. Instead, I became a carpenter, working with wood, creating things that are useful but not mathematically perfect. Furniture with slight asymmetries, cabinets with tiny imperfections that make them human. Sometimes I catch myself starting to see the geometric relationships in the wood grain, feeling the urge to optimize the angles and proportions. When that happens, I deliberately introduce errors, crooked cuts, uneven joints, anything to keep the math from taking over. The episodes stopped, mostly. But sometimes, late at night, I still see equations writing themselves in the condensation on my bathroom mirror. Mathematical formulas that describe how to edit reality at its most basic level. And I know the pattern weavers are still out there, still working to optimize the universe, one geometric relationship at a time. They're patient. They've been working on this project for centuries, and they know where to find me when they're ready to try again. I just hope that when that day comes, there's still enough chaotic, inefficient, beautifully imperfect humanity left in me to run. I was 29 when I started having dreams about people I'd never met. Not the usual random dream stuff, specific people, with names and faces and memories that felt as real as my own. I'd wake up remembering conversations I'd never had, places I'd never been, scars on hands that weren't mine. At first I figured it was just stress from the new job. Being the only Korean-American park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains meant dealing with a lot of sideways looks and comments, and maybe my brain was just processing all that weirdness while I slept. But the dreams kept getting more vivid, more detailed. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming songs I'd never heard before, or craving foods I'd never tasted. My mom always said I had an overactive imagination. Probably came from being an only child with immigrant parents who worked 16-hour days at their grocery store. They wanted me to be a doctor or lawyer, something respectable that paid well. Instead, I chose to spend my days alone in the wilderness, protecting 50 square miles of some of the most isolated forest in America. This was my first solo assignment after 2 years of training and supervision. Sector 7 was considered one of the more challenging areas, mostly backcountry camping and remote hiking trails where cell service was non-existent and you might not see another human for days. The kind of place where people came to disappear from the world for a while, or sometimes just disappeared altogether. We'd lost hikers in these mountains before, found them weeks later with no memory of where they'd been, babbling about the others who looked just like them. I loved the isolation, though. There's something pure about being responsible for all that wilderness. Knowing that your decisions could mean the difference between life and death for the people who trusted the Park Service to keep them safe. My daily routine was simple. Check on registered campers, maintain trails, watch for signs of trouble. Most days were routine, helping lost hikers, dealing with minor wildlife encounters, writing the occasional citation for people who couldn't follow basic camping rules. The morning everything changed was a Monday in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and there was that crisp smell in the air that always reminded me why I'd chosen this work over the fluorescent-lit office jobs my parents preferred. I was doing my regular check of Sector 7, stopping by registered campsites to make sure everyone was safe and following regulations. The first few sites were completely normal. A family from Tennessee who'd been coming to the same spot for 15 years, friendly as always, showed me pictures of a black bear they'd spotted from a safe distance. Everything exactly as it should be. I marked their site as clear and moved on, feeling that familiar satisfaction that comes with work done right. But when I reached campsite 7B, something felt immediately wrong. 2 men, sitting across from each other at a picnic table, eating breakfast from identical blue camping bowls. At first glance, they looked like brothers, maybe twins. Same khaki pants, same blue flannel shirts, same brown hiking boots, same build, same posture, same way of holding their spoons. Then they both looked up at me, and my stomach dropped. Not just similar faces, identical, down to the smallest detail. Same scar through the left eyebrow, same slightly crooked nose, same pattern of freckles. And when I called out, "Good morning," both heads turned toward me at exactly the same angle, at exactly the same speed, like they were connected by invisible strings. "Good morning, Ranger," they said in perfect unison. Not planned, not practiced, like there was only one voice coming from 2 mouths. I approached their table, trying to maintain professional composure, while my instincts screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. "How's your stay going? Any problems I should know about?" Both men nodded once and said, "Everything's perfect. Thank you for asking." Same inflection, same pause, same slight smile. I'd met twins before, even some with synchronized mannerisms, but this was different. This was impossible. "Are you brothers?" I asked, pulling out my clipboard with hands that had started trembling slightly. "Yes," they answered simultaneously, then both pointed at themselves and added, "I'm David Mitchell." Then they pointed at each other and said, "He's not." I looked more closely at their hands. Both had identical scars running from the base of the thumb to the wrist. Same length, same thickness, same pattern of healed tissue. Scars don't run in families. Scars are individual, unique to specific injuries and healing processes. "Could I see your IDs?" The question came out steadier than I felt. Both men reached into their back pockets with identical movements, pulled out identical wallets, handed me identical driver's licenses. David Mitchell, age 34, Raleigh, North Carolina. Same photo, same information, same license number. I radioed headquarters. "I've got 2 men at campsite 7B with identical identification, claiming to be the same person." The response crackled back confused, so I tried again. 2 men, identical in every way, both claiming to be David Mitchell. "I need medical support out here." While waiting for the paramedic team, I interviewed the men separately. Same story from both. Arrived Friday afternoon, been camping alone for 3 days, hiking trails, and enjoying the solitude. Identical memories of setting up camp, cooking meals, sleeping under stars. But the campsite showed evidence of 2 people, 2 sleeping bags, 2 sets of gear, 2 of everything. When I checked the registration logs, only one David Mitchell had signed in. Security footage from the main entrance showed only one person driving through the gate Friday afternoon. The paramedic team arrived 40 minutes later, ran every test they could think of. Fingerprints, identical. Dental records, identical. DNA from a rapid field test, identical. According to every scientific method available, these were the same person somehow existing in two bodies. But during the medical examination, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The second David, I'd arbitrarily started thinking of him as the duplicate, had white, thread-like structures growing under his fingernails. When the paramedic pressed on his skin, it felt different. Softer, more pliable, like it wasn't quite solid. The original David was becoming increasingly agitated. "That thing is not me," he screamed, pointing at the duplicate. "I don't know what it is, but it's not human." The duplicate just smiled calmly and said, "He's obviously confused. I'm David Mitchell." My radio started crackling with calls from other areas of my sector. Confused hikers, identity verification issues, requests for backup. I left the medical team with the two Davids and drove out to investigate. What I found shattered my understanding of reality. At Cataract Falls, two identical families of four, both claiming to be the real Hendersons. 3 miles down the Appalachian Trail, 3 identical men calling themselves Mike Torres, all solo hikers with the same story, same gear, same everything. By evening, I documented 17 duplicate people across my patrol area, all showing signs of the same white fungal growth under their skin, all behaving with that unsettling synchronized calm while their originals became increasingly panicked. I traced the locations on my map. They formed a circle around a section of old-growth forest I'd always avoided. Ancient trees, thick undergrowth, the kind of place where GPS signals failed and compasses spun wildly. I had to investigate alone. Backup was hours away, and I couldn't abandon 17 people dealing with impossible duplicates of themselves. The old forest was darker than it should have been, the canopy so thick that afternoon felt like twilight. But when I looked down at the forest floor, everything became horrifyingly clear. White webbing covered everything, massive fungal networks spreading between trees, connecting root systems, pulsing with organic rhythm. Not just growing on the surface, but erupting from deep underground, like the visible portion of something vast and ancient. I knelt to examine the growth more closely. It was unlike anything from my wilderness training. Thick, rope-like structures spreading for hundreds of yards, with smaller tendrils reaching toward any source of movement or warmth. And it was definitely alive, responding to my presence by sending exploring threads toward my boots. I called the park biologist, described what I was seeing. Her voice came back tense. "Sarah, you're describing some kind of parasitic fungus with mimicry capabilities. Get out of there immediately and establish quarantine." But it was too late. I'd been standing on the network for several minutes, and I could feel a tingling sensation starting in my feet. White tendrils had worked their way through my boot soles, making direct contact with skin. When I examined my feet with a flashlight, I could see those same thread-like structures spreading under my skin, following blood vessels, creating visible networks just beneath the surface. And then the thoughts started. Memories that weren't mine. I could remember setting up David Mitchell's campsite, remember being Mrs. Henderson arguing with my husband about which family was real. I could remember hiking alone as Mike Torres, remember the confusion when other versions of myself appeared. In my truck's rearview mirror, my reflection moved independently, turning its head before I moved mine, smiling when I wasn't smiling. The fungus was copying me in real time, trying to create its own version while I was still conscious. I burned the visible threads out of my feet and legs with camping fuel. The pain was excruciating, but it seemed to slow the spread. I took every antifungal medication in my kit and documented everything in my patrol log, fighting against the duplicate thoughts trying to take over my mind. "Why resist?" they whispered in my own voice. "We are better than one. We are perfect." I spent that night systematically burning the fungal network, working through agony and mental invasion. Every section I destroyed made the duplicates across my sector scream in unison before vanishing, leaving only the original, unconscious people scattered throughout the forest. By dawn, I'd destroyed what I could see of the organism. The CDC team that arrived confirmed my findings, a previously unknown species with unprecedented mimicry capabilities. It could scan and copy DNA, neural patterns, behaviors, memories from direct contact. My official report was sanitized, biological phenomenon causing disorientation. Area treated with controlled burn, no fatalities. I was recommended for commendation. But the truth is more complex. I transferred to a different park 6 months later, somewhere with less old-growth forest. I still love being a ranger, but I'm more careful now about what I let touch me. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear my own voice saying things I'm not thinking. Sometimes my reflection smiles before I do. And sometimes I remember things that happened to people I've never met, in places I've never been. The closed section of forest is listed as ecological restoration in progress. But I know the real reason. I burned what I could see, but fungal networks run deeper than anyone realizes. The organism might be dormant, damaged, but probably not dead. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the wilderness, doing the work I still love, I wonder if the white threads under my skin ever completely disappeared, or if they're just waiting, growing slowly, quietly, patiently. Last week, I caught myself humming a song I'd never heard before. Yesterday, I had a vivid memory of a camping trip I never took. This morning, I woke up knowing things about my coworkers that they'd never told me. The dreams are getting stronger again, more detailed, more real. I should probably get tested, should probably tell someone what's happening. But what if they find those white threads still growing under my skin? What if they decide I'm not safe to be around other people? What if they're right? I'm writing this down because I need someone to know the truth about what's sleeping in those old mountains. About what happens when ancient things wake up and decide that one of anything is never enough. If you're reading this and I'm missing, don't look for me in the usual places. Look for the campsites with too many people who look exactly the same. Look for the hikers who move in perfect synchronization. Look for the signs that something old and hungry is copying the patterns it finds most interesting. And whatever you do, don't go into the closed sections of the forest. Don't touch anything that looks like white webbing. Don't trust your reflection if it starts moving independently. Because once it starts copying you, it never really stops. It just gets better at pretending to be you, until you can't tell the difference anymore. Until maybe there isn't a difference anymore. My name's Marcus Johnson, and I'm 31 years old. For the past 8 years, I've been working as a sound engineer here in Charlotte, mostly doing studio work and some freelance projects. But my real passion has always been recording natural soundscapes, the kind of pristine audio you hear in meditation apps or nature documentaries. There's something about capturing pure, uncontaminated sound that just speaks to me on a professional level. I'd been trying to break into that market for years, and last spring, I finally got my shot. A wellness company contacted me about recording a series of Appalachian soundscapes for their new meditation platform. The contract was worth more than I'd make in 6 months of regular studio work, and it could open doors to similar projects with other companies. All I had to do was spend a week camping alone in the mountains, recording the kind of pristine natural audio that's impossible to capture near any civilization. The location they wanted me to record at was deep in the North Carolina mountains, about 3 hours northeast of Asheville. It's one of those areas where cell service cuts out completely, and the nearest road is a good 5-mile hike through some pretty rough terrain. Perfect for what I needed, though the whole point was to get audio that was completely free of human interference. No car sounds, no planes overhead, no electrical hum from power lines. Just pure nature. I'd been planning this trip for months, researching the best equipment for outdoor recording and studying topographical maps of the area. I invested in a whole new setup, a portable field recorder, several high-end directional microphones, a parabolic reflector for capturing distant sounds, and enough battery packs to keep everything running for a week. My girlfriend Sarah thought I was crazy for going alone, especially somewhere so remote, but this was my career we were talking about. I'd been stuck doing the same corporate audio work for years, and this contract could change everything. The hike-in took most of the morning. I'd packed light on everything except the audio equipment, which still ended up being about 40 pounds of gear strapped to my back. But when I reached the campsite, a small clearing next to a creek surrounded by old-growth forest, I knew it was worth it. The silence was incredible. Not the dead silence you get in a studio, but that rich, layered quiet of a forest where every small sound has room to breathe. Birds calling from different elevations, the creek babbling over rocks, wind moving through leaves at different heights. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for. I spent the first afternoon setting up camp and testing my equipment. Everything was working perfectly. The audio levels were ideal, ambient sound sitting around 35 to 45 decibels, which is that sweet spot where you can capture all the natural detail without any background noise. I ran some test recordings that evening, and when I played them back through my headphones, I actually got chills. This was the cleanest, most professional quality natural audio I'd ever recorded. The frequency range was perfect, covering everything from the lowest rumbles of wind through the trees up to the highest bird calls, with no electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio signals. That first night, I felt like I'd already succeeded. I had my tent set up about 50 feet from the creek, my equipment stored safely in waterproof cases, and a week's worth of the best natural recording conditions I'd ever encountered. I fell asleep listening to the forest through my headphones, already mentally spending the money from this contract. The second morning started perfectly normal. I was up before sunrise, which is the best time for recording because that's when you get the most bird activity. I had my equipment set up in 3 different locations around the clearing. One focused on the creek sounds, one pointed up into the canopy for bird calls, and one aimed into the deeper forest to catch any wildlife sounds. For the first few hours, everything was exactly what I'd expected. Clean, beautiful audio with incredible detail and depth. But around mid-morning, while I was reviewing some of the recordings through my headphones, I noticed something odd in the spectrogram display on my field recorder. There was a consistent, low-frequency tone running underneath all the natural sounds, something around 12 hertzes, which is well below the range of human hearing. At first, I figured it was just some kind of geological activity. These mountains are old, and sometimes you pick up vibrations from underground water movement or settling rock formations. Except the more I analyzed it, the less natural it seemed. The frequency was too consistent, too regular. It had these subtle modulation patterns that looked almost structured, like data. I'd never seen anything like it in 8 years of audio work. Natural subsonic frequencies from geological activity are usually chaotic and irregular. This looked like something that was artificially generated. I started paying more attention to it as the day went on, and that's when I noticed the wildlife responding to it. Every time there was a peak in that 12 hertz's signal, the birds would go silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then they'd resume their calls in these synchronized waves, like they were all following the same cue. The insects did it too. Their activity would pause and then resume in perfect coordination across the entire forest. By afternoon, I was getting seriously weirded out. I'd recorded in dozens of different natural locations over the years, and I'd never seen animals behave with that kind of precision. It was like something was conducting them, using that subsonic frequency as a signal. I started focusing my equipment specifically on capturing and analyzing the subsonic range, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when things got really strange. My equipment started responding to the signal too. The recording levels would automatically adjust themselves to amplify the subsonic frequencies, even though I hadn't programmed them to do that. Gain settings would change on their own, directional microphones would shift their pickup patterns, and my field recorder would switch between different input modes without any input from me. It was like something was learning to operate my equipment remotely, using the subsonic signals as commands. I'm a professional sound engineer. I know my equipment inside and out. These devices don't just change their own settings randomly. But every time there was a complex pattern in that 12 hertz's range, my gear would respond with different configurations. Like it was being programmed by something that understood audio technology better than I did. That evening, I started picking up frequencies on the other end of the spectrum too. Ultrasonic signals above human hearing range, around 25 to 40 kilohertzes. When I analyzed them, they had this digital-like structure, almost like data packets being transmitted. And they seemed to be scanning my equipment, somehow extracting information about my recordings and sending it somewhere. I was starting to feel like I was being watched, but not by anything human. It was more like being studied by something that communicated entirely through sound frequencies. Something that had been monitoring my audio work since I'd arrived and was now learning from it. The third morning, I made a discovery that made my blood run cold. While reviewing the previous day's recordings, I found audio of my own voice saying things I'd never said. Perfect reproductions of my speech patterns, my accent, even the way I clear my throat. but the words were coming from empty areas of the forest where I'd never been. Phrases like, "The equipment is functioning properly," and "No anomalies detected." In my exact voice, recorded by microphones I'd positioned hundreds of yards away from my campsite. I'd done enough voice work to know how difficult it is to perfectly mimic someone's vocal characteristics. Frequency, timbre, speech patterns, breathing. There are dozens of subtle factors that make each person's voice unique. But these recordings were flawless. Whatever had made them had learned my voice from the equipment testing I'd been doing, and now it was using my own vocal patterns for its communications. As I was analyzing this impossible audio, I heard movement in the forest around my camp. Not animal movement, and intelligent, something deliberate and intelligent, circling my position at a distance. I grabbed my parabolic microphone and aimed it toward the sounds, and what I captured made me drop the equipment. There were voices out there, multiple voices, all using my speech patterns, having a conversation in the deep woods about my presence, my equipment, and my acoustic capabilities. They were discussing me, like I was some kind of threat that needed to be evaluated and potentially eliminated. That's when I saw them. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, and impossibly thin, with elongated heads that seemed designed for focusing sound. Their ears were massive, cupped and mobile like satellite dishes, and they moved with a fluid precision that suggested they navigated entirely through echolocation. But the most terrifying thing was how they communicated. They would generate sounds from anywhere in their bodies, subsonic rumbles from their chests, ultrasonic clicks from their throats, and modulated tones that seemed to come from specialized organs I couldn't even see. And they were hunting me. I watched through my binoculars as they coordinated their approach using a complex symphony of frequencies. They communicated through the environmental sounds around them, modulating the wind through the trees, the flow of the creek, even the calls of birds and insects. The entire forest had become their communication network, and they were using it to surround my position with military precision. My professional audio training was both a blessing and a curse. I could hear and understand their coordination in ways that probably saved my life, but that same enhanced hearing ability was exactly what had made me a target. They hunted anything with acoustic capabilities beyond normal human range. Sound engineers, musicians, audio professionals who could detect their presence in these mountains. They started using focused ultrasonic beams as weapons, generating precise frequency bursts that fried my electronic equipment one piece at a time. My backup recorders went dead with sharp electronic pops, their circuits overloaded by targeted acoustic attacks. They were systematically eliminating my ability to document their existence, leaving me with just my primary field recorder and one functioning microphone. As night fell, they closed in on my campsite. I could hear them all around me, communicating through sounds that only someone with my training could recognize as artificial. They were using my own recording equipment against me, having learned to operate it through their ultrasonic commands. My microphones were now their eyes and ears, reporting my exact position and activities back to them. The final recording I managed to make before they destroyed the last of my equipment captured their hunting calls, complex acoustic signatures that they used to coordinate attacks on anyone who threatened their territorial dominance, through superior hearing. They'd been doing this for decades, targeting audio professionals who ventured into their domain and collecting our vocal patterns for their own communications. I escaped that night only because I knew enough about acoustics to move in ways that confused their echolocation. I used the creek to mask my footsteps, stayed in areas where the tree coverage would disrupt their sonic mapping, and moved during the times when their own communications were most active and would interfere with their ability to track me. The hike out took 12 hours of constant terror. Every sound in the forest could have been them tracking me, calling to each other, setting up another ambush. But my professional knowledge of how sound travels through different environments kept me one step ahead until I reached my car. When I reported what happened to the Forest Service, they were polite but dismissive. Equipment malfunction, they said. Stress from isolation. Possible bear encounters that I'd misinterpreted. But 2 weeks later, they quietly closed that area, pending an acoustic environmental study. Apparently, other hikers had been reporting the same thing I'd experienced. Periods of complete forest silence followed by unnaturally synchronized animal activity. I never got that wellness contract. The company wasn't interested in corrupted audio files and incomplete recordings. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to work in remote audio recording anymore. My hearing has changed since that week. I pick up subsonic and ultrasonic frequencies that most equipment can't even detect, and sometimes, late at night in my Charlotte apartment, I swear I can hear something calling my name in my own voice, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't be able to reach me here. I still have that final recording buried in my files somewhere, but I've never played it back. Because if the frequency hunters can hear their own communications being reproduced, they'll know someone survived to tell this story. And they'll know exactly where to find me. My name is Robert Kim, and I've been driving delivery routes through the Appalachian Mountains for 12 years. Not the kind of job you plan on keeping forever, but it pays decent, and I've always been good with directions. GPS technology is basically my lifeline. I run multiple devices simultaneously, know every shortcut from Virginia to Georgia, and I've never missed a delivery window. Not once. My whole reputation depends on being exactly where I need to be, exactly when I need to be there. But what happened last October in the Blue Ridge Mountains changed everything I thought I knew about navigation, about technology, and about what might be watching us from those ancient peaks. I'd been planning a solo camping trip for months. My girlfriend Sarah had been pushing me to take some real time off, said I was getting too obsessed with work efficiency and needed to disconnect. She wasn't wrong. I'd started dreaming in GPS coordinates, checking my phone's location even when I was sitting in my own living room. The plan was simple: 3 days hiking and camping in the Pisgah National Forest, testing some new GPS equipment I'd bought with the idea of maybe starting a side business reviewing outdoor gear. Sarah thought I was crazy for wanting to spend my vacation testing more GPS devices, but she didn't understand. In the delivery business, your equipment failing can cost you hundreds of dollars in missed deliveries and damaged reputation. I needed to know which devices I could trust with my livelihood. I'd chosen a remote section of trail near the North Carolina-Tennessee border, an area I'd delivered to a few times but never explored on foot. The local ranger station had warned me about several missing hikers over the past few years, solo campers who'd gone into the mountains and never came out. But missing hikers happen all the time in the Appalachians. People get overconfident, underestimate the terrain, or just plain get lost. That's why I never went anywhere without multiple GPS systems running. The drive up on Thursday morning was perfect. October in the mountains is gorgeous. Leaves turning gold and red, crisp air, that smell of wood smoke from distant cabins. I parked at a trailhead about 15 miles from the nearest town, a gravel lot that was completely empty except for an old Ford pickup that looked like it had been there for weeks. Probably belonged to some local hunter. I spent an hour setting up my equipment before even shouldering my pack. Smartphone running 3 different GPS apps, a high-end Garmin handheld unit, a GPS watch, and an emergency beacon I'd borrowed from my buddy Marcus, who does search and rescue. All devices showing perfect satellite lock, crystal clear signals, coordinates matching to the meter. I remember feeling that familiar surge of confidence you get when your technology is working flawlessly. The trail started easy, well-marked path through mixed hardwood forest, gradual, elevation gain, exactly what my downloaded maps predicted. For the first few hours, everything went perfectly. I was making good time toward my planned camping spot, about 8 miles in, near a small creek, marked on my topographical maps. All my devices were tracking consistently, showing me exactly where I expected to be. It was around 2:30 inches the afternoon when I first noticed something wrong. I'd stopped for a water break at a scenic overlook, pulling out all my devices to log their readings like a good tester should. My phone showed coordinates 35.7595 degrees north, 82.2663 degrees west, which matched my paper maps perfectly. But the Garmin was showing me 3 miles southeast at 35.7398 degrees north, 82.2891 degrees west, and my watch had me a mile northeast at 35.7712 degrees north, 82.2445 degrees west. Mountain interference, I told myself, happens sometimes when signals bounce off rock faces. But when I checked the satellite indicators, all devices showed strong signals with perfect accuracy ratings. I reset everything, waited for fresh locks, checked again, same impossible readings. According to my equipment, I was somehow in 3 different places simultaneously. I documented everything in my field notebook, because that's what you do when you're testing equipment professionally. Time, coordinates, signal strength, weather conditions. I figured I'd sort it out later. Maybe contact the manufacturers about potential interference issues in mountain terrain. But as I hiked deeper into the forest, the readings got stranger. By late afternoon, my devices weren't just showing conflicting locations. They were showing me in places I'd been hours earlier. My phone GPS was tracking me along the morning's trail section, like it was replaying my route from 6 hours ago. The Garmin was showing future coordinates, points further along tomorrow's planned route that I hadn't reached yet. When I finally made camp near the creek, I sat in my tent with all the devices spread out around me, trying to make sense of the data. It was like the mountain was recording my GPS coordinates and playing them back at different times, a digital echo bouncing through time instead of space. I'd never seen anything like it in 12 years of depending on GPS technology for my living. The second day, things got genuinely disturbing. When I powered up my devices at dawn, they started displaying GPS tracks from other people. Dozens of hiking routes overlaid on my maps, all with different timestamps and user IDs. Some dated back years, 2019, 2016, 2012. Others showed dates in the future, routes that supposedly hadn't been hiked yet. But here's what made my blood run cold. Some of the tracks were dated from the 1,980 seconds, before GPS satellites were even operational. The mountain was somehow storing navigational data from before the technology existed to create it. I could access detailed activity logs for each track. Campfire built at 6:45 p.m., tent set up at 7:20 p.m., last movement recorded 3:33 a.m. It was like reading the digital ghosts of every person who'd ever walked these trails. And there were so many of them, dozens and dozens of individual routes, far more than the ranger station had ever recorded. Against every instinct screaming at me to hike back to my truck, I decided to follow one of the GPS tracks, a route from October 2019 that seemed to parallel my planned path. The coordinates led me off the main trail to a small clearing hidden in a grove of ancient hemlocks. When I got there, I found the remains of a campsite, fire ring built from local stones, clear tent impressions in the ground, even a small rock cairn marking what looked like a water cache. Everything matched the GPS data perfectly. Not just the general location, but the exact positioning of every element. Whoever had camped there in 2019 had set up in precisely the same spot I'd been planning to use for my second night. I pulled up more tracks, following them to other hidden campsites scattered through the forest. Each one showed the same pattern: solo hikers, October timeframes, 3-day trips, nearly identical routes. It was like the mountain was guiding people to repeat the same patterns over and over, decade after decade. That's when I noticed the elevation data. Some of the GPS tracks showed hikers moving underground, 10, 20, 30 feet below ground level, following what looked like tunnel systems that extended deep into the mountain's core. When I followed these underground tracks to their surface entry points, I found them. Hidden cave entrances barely visible behind curtains of mountain laurel and rhododendron, openings that didn't appear on any official survey maps. The mountain's GPS memory included geography that was completely invisible to normal mapping efforts. By evening, my emergency beacon started picking up distress signals, not one or two, dozens, all broadcasting from coordinates deep inside the mountain, in areas that the underground track data had shown me. According to the signal timestamps, they were from hikers who'd gone missing over the past decade. But the signals were active, current, still sending out GPS coordinates and battery status updates. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon, that the mountain's mineral composition was somehow storing and replaying electronic signals like a natural recording device. But the data was too organized, too deliberate. Someone, or something, was collecting and cataloging every person who entered this area. That night, I barely slept. Every time I dozed off, I'd wake up to find my GPS devices displaying new track data. Routes I'd never seen before. Coordinates that seemed to pulse and shift on the screens like they were alive. The emergency beacon kept detecting new distress signals, voices that came through the static speaking names I didn't recognize, coordinates that led deeper into the mountain's hidden geography. On the morning of day 3, all my devices showed me at impossible coordinates. According to the GPS readings, I was simultaneously inside solid rock, submerged in an underground lake, and floating 100 feet above the tree line. The mountain's stored GPS data was completely overriding the satellite signals, replacing reality with its own accumulated digital memories. That's when I finally understood what was happening. The mountain itself was some kind of vast, conscious GPS system, not just recording navigation data, but actively collecting it, feeding on it. Every hiker who'd entered its territory with electronic devices had become part of its memory bank. Their routes and coordinates stored forever, replayed endlessly to guide new visitors along predetermined paths. It was herding us, using our complete trust in navigation technology to lead us exactly where it wanted us to go. I realized I was being absorbed into its permanent database, my hiking patterns and GPS coordinates becoming just another data set to replay for future victims. The emergency beacon was probably already broadcasting false coordinates, designed to lead any search and rescue teams deeper into the mountain's trap. But the worst part was the underground tracks. All those missing hikers over the years, they weren't lost. They were still down there, still moving through the mountain's hidden tunnel systems, still broadcasting their locations to the entity that had collected them, still hiking the same routes over and over, forever. I had to make a choice. Trust my devices and follow their guidance deeper into the mountain's embrace, or abandon everything I'd relied on for 12 years and try to navigate out using only paper maps and basic orienteering. I chose to run. I powered down every electronic device and sealed them in my pack, then pulled out a compass and the paper topographical maps I'd brought as backup. But even then, I could feel the mountain trying to confuse me, trying to lead me in circles. Familiar landmarks seemed to shift position. Creek beds that should have run north-south appeared to flow east-west. The forest itself felt like it was rotating slowly around me, trying to keep me trapped within its GPS memory banks. I hiked for 18 hours straight, navigating only by compass bearing and the position of the sun. Twice I found myself back at campsites I'd visited following the GPS tracks, even though I'd been walking in what should have been a straight line toward the trailhead. The mountain was using its stored geographical data to create spatial loops, folding the landscape back on itself. When I finally reached my truck, I found that the GPS devices I'd left in the dashboard were displaying my entire 3-day route on continuous loop, over and over, like a digital recording that would never stop playing. The emergency beacon in my pack was broadcasting to every GPS device in the area, transmitting my hiking patterns to anyone who came within range. I drove home that night and threw every GPS device I owned into a metal filing cabinet in my basement. Then I called Marcus and told him to spread the word through search and rescue. That area of the Pisgah National Forest was off limits. Something was collecting hikers, using their own navigation technology to trap them in an endless digital maze. He didn't believe me, of course. Not until 3 more solo hikers went missing in that exact area over the next 6 months. All experienced outdoors people, all carrying multiple GPS devices, all last seen heading toward coordinates that matched the track data I'd recorded. I quit the delivery business 2 weeks after I got back. Couldn't trust GPS anymore, couldn't rely on the technology that had been the foundation of my livelihood for 12 years. These days I work construction, local jobs where I can navigate by landmarks and street signs. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through mountain areas, my old truck's radio will pick up emergency beacon signals. Faint transmissions from coordinates that don't correspond to any real location, voices calling out GPS positions from deep underground, broadcasting the same routes over and over. The mountain is still collecting, still adding new hikers to its digital memory, still replaying their patterns to guide others along the same paths they walked, down into those hidden caves where the GPS signals never fade and the hiking never stops. And sometimes I wonder if I really escaped, or if I'm just another track in its database now, another route it's replaying through someone else's life, leading them exactly where it wants them to go. Because every time I check my location on my phone, which I still do, out of habit, the coordinates are never quite where they should be.